All right, this is Jonathan Avitua here with the Danville Bicentennial Project, and I am interviewing Tracie Shearer. Is that how I say it?
Yes.
Awesome. So, just for the record, do I have permission to record this interview?
Yes, you do.
Awesome. And so, I know I mentioned your name, but could you tell us what your age is?
I'm 60 this year.
All right. And where and when were you born?
I was born in 1964 in Kokomo, Indiana.
All right. So what brought you to Danville?
We have been West Siders. My husband worked at the airport
Mhm.
in Indianapolis, and we had been West Siders. And he was reading a little real estate newspaper one time and found this cool house and said, we should go buy this house. And so that's what we did.
That is an awesome enough reason, right? Um, so you moved here. Uh, what drew you to the Royal? How'd you get involved with that?
Well, when we moved here, it was 1998. I had four children, ranging in age from first grade through freshman in high school. We lived just 2 blocks north of the square. So we were really excited about everything, that the small town had to offer. And we're disappointed when we discovered that the Royal was closed and was not, there weren't any plans to reopen it as a movie theater at that time. And then I was working at the courthouse grounds, who they had opened just the same time that we moved here. And I met Lee Comer, and he purchased the building in 2001, or maybe around 2000. He had purchased the building, and I had heard that. So I asked him what was he going to do with it. He told me that he hoped to reopen it as a movie theater, and he hadn't really found any company that was going to do that. So I said, well, my husband and I had thought it would be cool to buy the building, but we just didn't have the resources to do everything that needed to be done or take care of it properly. So we were thrilled that he had bought it, but I would love to be involved in some way. I didn't know how to run a movie theater. I didn't know anything about it, but I just was kind of passionate about it. And so we began kind of our partnership. I worked for him. I managed the renovation. I made some phone calls and made some connections and figured out, what type of equipment we were going to need. How was I going to book movies? How it was going to happen. And so that's what we did. We spent most of 2001 doing a major renovation, updating the equipment, getting it ready, for the public. And then in December of 2001, we opened with a big free gala and a screening of It's a Wonderful Life.
That is awesome. So have you mentioned that you hadn't had any training or anything like that. What were you doing beforehand?
I was a stay-at-home mom. I've been a lot of things. I'm a little bit of I do a lot of things. I met my husband when we both were in the U.S. Army. And then when we started having children, I was a stay-at-home mom. When we moved to Danville, I was working as an assistant to the minister at the church that we went to in Indianapolis. I've done a lot of things. I had done some amount of renovating at that point. I had done decorating, some seamstress. I had done, so, I had some skills as far as that goes, but I was a stay-at-home mom, and I was selling breakfast at courthouse grounds.
That seems like a pretty big jump. Have you been involved with it ever since?
I left at the end of 2020. So there was a brief hiatus. So I ran it for several years as an employee of Lee Comer. Some of my kids worked for me. I hired, local teenagers, and we were kind of a small family there. And then there was a point, I think it was around maybe 2007 or so, that we had been doing some live music at the theater occasionally. And we were working with a man by the name of Charles Watts. And he had been with Upland Brewing when we first met him. And then he would come and help us book music and serve beer and wine at the shows. And then he had an interest in purchasing the theater. So he purchased the theater on contract from Lee Comer. And he was really just mostly interested in running it himself. So I kind of moved on at that point. And then after a few years, Mr. Comer ended up reacquiring the building and asked me would I come back and run it. So at that time, and I want to say that was maybe in 2008 or 2009, we entered into a bit of a different relationship where I was leasing the theater from Lee Comer and operating it as my own business.
That's quite a long time and a lot of fluctuation,
Yeah.
but that's some good consistency there. So let me ask you, because we have some files on the Royal, and I was looking through it, and from my understanding, there was a lull in like the '90s. That it had caught fire in the '80s and then like shut down in the '90s. It was kind of dead before you and Lee Comer got it running again. Could you think back and just describe the state of the building when you first started renovating? What did it look like?
It was fairly run down. The front of it looked decent enough. There was a facade on there that was old. I'm gonna guess probably from the 50s because it was an enameled metal facade that had that kind of look to it. The marquee needed some work, but inside really was where things were fairly run down. So there in the front, as you go in, there's kind of a brick floor in the front part of the lobby, which I think at one point may have been part of the outside of the building, like a covered outdoor sort of lobby area. And then you go through two doors into the main lobby, and there was no concession counter to speak of. There was just some tables. It had been most recently being used as for civic theater, rented out to the civic theater. So they would set up tables and sell some concessions and things, but there wasn't a proper concession area. And where the concession area is now, or at least when I left in 2020, I think it's still the same. You to the right or on the south side of the lobby there, you went back in. Once upon a time, there had been a restroom in there, which we discovered later was not properly plumbed. So, and then I was also told by the people who always tell me stories when I was running the theater that down in the basement, which is now where the little hair shop is, that has also been a chocolate shop and a cupcake shop and a smoothie shop, that little spot right in the front of the building, in that basement had been the bathroom. So when people my age were young and little, what they remembered was going down these creepy stairs into this creepy basement to have to go to the bathroom. So there wasn't really a very good, properly working restroom, although there was a restroom where the men's room is now. It was not in very good shape. And as you went into the lobby, into the auditorium, from the lobby, it was just open doors, and you went in, and a previous owner had installed what I think was meant to be sort of a dinner theater type of a situation, where there were ramps that went down where the aisles are, and then there were these sort of flat wooden platforms built off to the side with rails in the front. But seats had been reinstalled. The original seats had been reinstalled. Now, of course, the original floor was slopes down toward the stage area, and the platforms were flat, but the bottoms of the chairs were angled to accommodate the sloping. So it was just a little bit funky and wonky in there. Just everything was not really well kept, and there was a stage there, and it went to the north side of the building. It kind of closed off the rear entry or the rear exit hallway back there. So it was a little bit bigger forward to the seats than it is now. And there was a lot of cracking plaster. It was in need of paint. There was some old ductwork, running through. There may have been some leaks in the ceiling. It was just kind of a general disaster.
Well, yeah. So that sounds like it was a lot to deal with. So, um, What changes did you make to that in that first renovation? Because I'm sure it
Hmm.
kept changing as time went on.
Yes, there were subsequent improvements, but what we did was we built the wall that is now forms the hallway. So you would go when you went through these two doors into the auditorium, you were just straight up in the auditorium. We built a hallway and then a ramp on one side and stairs on the other to get down into the auditorium. And then we redid the men's room and we added a ladies' room that we had to take a little section of the back corner on the north side to create this new ladies' room. So we had two proper working restrooms. I went to several theaters around the state, old theaters. I had this look that I had in mind. I wanted it to feel old. So I went to one theater. I can't remember exactly which one it was. But I saw that they had these wooden like stalls in the bathroom, and we kind of recreated that so it would look like they had been there for a long time. And then in the lobby, we created the concession area. So we had the counter with the little curved front. We had that put in. We had the back counter put in so that we could accommodate, the popcorn machine, health department rules, that sort of thing. We had put an ice machine back in there. This is one thing we got an ice machine that served that crushed ice, which is my favorite, and turns out people would love it. They loved it. So that was a nice little addition that I was happy about. And then back where the original sort of restroom had been, we created a back kitchen. So we had all the proper sinks that we needed for the health department, and then shelves to store candy and paper goods and our supplies and things like that. So we created that whole concession area. And here's another nice little tidbit just while I'm in that area. There's a ladder. If you look behind the concession toward the right, there's a ladder that goes up into the projection room. And that was the main way that we would get up and down to the projection room, because the stairway, you have to go outside past the little shop, and then there's a stairway that goes up to the projection room and then on up to two apartments that are upstairs. So obviously it's inconvenient to have to get out from behind the concession area and go outside and in the door. So that ladder was there and we used it, all of my employees, everybody. That's how we got up and down to the projection area. So, and then we also put in new carpet in the lobby, painted, spruced everything up there, had plaster repaired. And then in the auditorium, we took out all of the wood, all of the platforms. Our intention was to restore the wood floor. So there's concrete, the aisles are concrete, but the in between there was like a little shallow, maybe like a 1-inch shallow dip down from the concrete that was wood floors. So, but before we did that, we plastered, we repaired, we modified the stage so it was just in front of the proscenium or the curtains that were there, and so that we could access both of the exit hallways in the back. And we painted everything. I put in new lighting. We always did struggle with the lighting situation, though. It was a little bit difficult to conquer in that room. The originals had been removed some years ago. We put in some ceiling fans, and then I bought Jerry Weed at Raiders Fabrics was a friend of mine, and I love that store. That's a whole nother story. But anyway, Jerry helped me order flame retardant fabric for, we needed to kind of soundproof and make it a little bit more acoustically friendly. So he ordered me yards and yards of this blue fabric that we put up, and I got up and stapled and draped it on as many places as I could in the auditorium. And then we had built that back wall, so where the hallway is, and so we put up foam and stapled fabric over all of that so that the sound would be not be bouncing all over in there. We also had the seats. Well, let me back up. We then kind of at almost the last minute, we took out all those platforms and we were going to refinish the floors, and then we realized the floors were just gone. They had water damage and probably termite damage, and we literally just shoveled them out. There just wasn't any solid wood to speak of, which made me think that maybe whoever had installed the platforms was just trying to kind of like cover up. So anyways, we shoveled them all out, and then we poured concrete last minute so that the whole floor was concrete, and then we just put carpet down the aisles, and we also installed a lighting system at that carpet edge lighting system so that you could kind of see where you were going in the dark. And then we put in surround sound. So we put in surround sound speakers down the walls, mounted, and then up on the top of that new hallway that we had built, we were able to put speakers, and then we had to renovate the projection room. We didn't do a lot to the projection room, but we updated all of the equipment. So there had been an old kind of reel-to-reel projector system in there, and interesting fact about the old way that movie theaters were run. So you'd have multiple projectors. So as one projector would run on one reel, then the projectionist there would be cues on the film itself, would have to start up the other projector so that they would run kind of simultaneously, and then the second reel would start. And it would kind of go back and forth. So really kind of important to have a projectionist up in the room all of the time. And then also, I'm going to lose my train of thought. Oh, but this equipment particularly had been upgraded since then. So they had a little bit of a different system, but still not modern as it should have been in 2001 when we were. Also, the very old movie projectors they used their light source, they used carbon arcing, which would actually create a flame in the lamp house that would project. And also the film was flammable, so it was real important to have a projectionist up there too. But the projection room itself is very interesting because it's a concrete room upstairs, and in front of the windows there are these little drop down windows, and the doors were lined with metal. And I was told by the old timers that it was designed with lead that held those little windows up, so that if the projection room or if the projector film would catch on fire, that lead would melt and the little windows would automatically drop down, and you could go out, close the doors, and contain the fire to the room. So I always thought that was kind of interesting, and you can still see a lot of that up there today. But back to the projector, sorry. We upgraded it to what was called a platter system. And we were using 35 millimeter film back then. And the platter would have it was just a big round flat plates stacked 3 high on the system. And you would spool the film onto the platter. And so it would spool out from the center, and then it would spool back onto an empty platter from the center again. So we never would have to rewind the film. It would just be ready to go for the next showing. We would just spool and start over again. And because we had 3 platters, we could actually have 2 films built at one time if necessary, as long as we had an empty platter to feed to. And we got our platter system, well, the people who helped me install it and find it was actually removed from the Tibbs Drive-In in Indianapolis because they were updating their system at the time. They were putting in a new platter system, and so we had the benefit of their old platter system. When I left at the end of 2020, that old platter system was still up there in the projection room, even though we had upgraded later to digital. I wanted to keep the platter in there because I would often give tours, and I feel like that building is a little bit of a living museum of history, and I felt like it was important for people to be able to understand how film used to play out versus how we watch it now. So we used to get the film delivered in cans, and there would be multiple cans, and typically 4 to 6, sometimes longer small reels would come, and we would have to splice the whole thing together into that giant reel on the platter. And then when we were finished with that film, we'd have to take it all apart, put it back on the individual reels, and send it back off for our new film.
Really?
Yes, that's how it would
I didn't
work.
realize they were still doing that like that late in the.
I had to look this up. We upgraded to our digital system in 2013. That's when we started our campaign. So by 2014, I believe we were digital. We were no longer using, we could still use the film. I had the projector, the platter set up so that if I wanted to play 35 millimeter film, I could. But but I don't know that we ever did much after that. But my teenage kids and the employees that worked for me, they knew how to splice film, put it together, take it apart. They could spool the projector. We always learned by fire. Like when something bad would happen, we would call and we would just like try to figure it out, work it out, and figure out how to fix it. Because there would be problems occasionally that would shut the film down and we would be under some time pressure to kind of get it fixed up. But my teenage kids were pretty good at troubleshooting and fixing 35 millimeter film and learning how to splice it and do all of those things. But that's what we did until about 2013, 2014. We were working and splicing with 35 millimeter film.
That is amazing. I don't know what I expected. I just didn't think it was that.
I used to like to give the tours. We'd get Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, birthday parties, different things. And I always would take them up. Sometimes we'd take them up the ladder, depending on their age. Sometimes we'd go up the steps, sometimes both. And I loved explaining how it worked. And I would have pieces of film because we also would get what we call the trailers. Some people call them previews, but trailers. We'd get these little tiny, and we'd have to put those at the beginning. We'd decide which ones we wanted to go on each film. We'd put the trailers on there. We'd splice them on. So I would always have these like laying around. And so I would show the kids, I'd hold the film up to the light and show them that you could see the pictures. And also on the 35 millimeter film, there was this like kind of like dotty, jaggedy line that ran down the side, and that was where the sound would pick up from the film. And in the projector, there was this little beam of light that was aimed at that line, and that's what would pick up the sound and send it to the sound equipment. And so I could show them, if I broke the plane, we wouldn't be able to hear the movie. If I put the film backwards and got that line on the wrong side, you wouldn't be able to hear the movie. I would show them things like that. I'd let them use the splicer and splice some film together, kind of show them how the platter worked, how it was cool, how we didn't have to rewind anything, explain all that. And it was almost always the parents that were way more fascinated by how it all worked than the little kids were. But the kids loved the splicing and looking at the pictures. I would often send them home with a little, short strip of 35 millimeter film.
That is so cool. Now you did mention y'all would run into trouble and that things like the electrical were uh gave y'all some grief. What would you say during this time was like the biggest challenge that y'all faced? Because that sounds like a lot.
Yeah, the challenge was for me. I kept a pretty small staff of employees because we weren't open. We just didn't have the business to be able to be open 7 days a week. So we played Tuesday nights generally, and then Friday nights, twice on Saturday, and Sunday afternoons. That was our typical schedule. In the summer times, we do free movies for kids, usually twice a day on Wednesdays, because we had a huge response to our free movie program, which was sponsored by local businesses. And we did the live music sometimes, but I couldn't give any employee very many hours. So I hired teenagers, mostly. At the beginning, it was all teenagers. Some were my own children. But I had a really good staff, and I liked to keep them. I didn't want to have a big turnover on kids. I liked to teach them how to do a lot of things. My teenagers that worked for me, they could do everything. They could, run the cash register and handle money. They could, make and sell concessions. They needed to know how to run the projector, restock and do clean bathrooms, which always was a challenge to keep the theater clean. Teenagers don't clean typically as well as moms do. That was always a bit of a challenge. The floor itself, just the auditorium. I was always flabbergasted how much stuff would be on the floor. How many people spilled their drinks. I remember thinking in my whole lifetime of going to the movies, I don't know if I ever spilled a drink on the floor, but every night, multiple times, there would be spills. And of course, a spill anywhere near the back or the middle would run right down to the front. So it was really hard to keep it not sticky and keep it clean. And managing, I didn't want to have too big of a staff because I wanted the kids to be able to get as many hours as they could. Although I was trying to manage their busy schedules too. So just scheduling was always a thing. And then, it seemed inevitable every time I wasn't there on a Friday night or I wasn't at my house 2 blocks away, that's when something would break, and I'd be out to dinner and I'd be like on the phone trying to help them through what had broken. But once you've learned it, once you've experienced it, then you know how to fix it the next time. But the first time, it's like, I'm not sure what I should be. And I was new. I had never done anything like this before. I had been trained in a weekend. Those wonderful guys came in, set up our projection equipment, showed me how to splice it together, and showed me how to spool the platter, and said, here you go. And I did it. But if anything ever went wrong, I didn't really know what to do. So we learned that by experience. And so just trying to get through a weekend and hope that nothing broke, and we were keeping everybody happy, and we could pop the popcorn fast enough. Those were some of the challenges.
All right. And yeah. So you did mention that like the community helped fund some of these free programs and stuff. Can you tell me a bit about the programs y'all did do? What kind of events y'all put on and the like?
So again, I was brand new. I hadn't grown up in Danville. I didn't have a lot of experience. But after we started running the theater, people would tell me their stories, which was wonderful. They'd tell me the stories of their first dates. They'd tell me the stories, and I had people telling me when they were kids, they remember coming in and going to an after school program, which was something we brought in fairly early on. And there was a teacher at the school, Barb Shearer was her name, that had been involved. I think she had been involved before. Anyways, we figured out how to bring the after school program back, and we did it for the elementary school kids. And they would come on the buses. This is back when you could get buses and bring the kids in after school, and they'd have to sign up. And we used it as a fundraiser for when the fifth graders used to go to Washington, D.C. every year. The school used it as a fundraiser to help kids who needed a little extra boost to be able to go. And Mrs. Shearer would be in charge of getting permission slips, and we'd have just so many kids that we could take. They'd bring them on the buses. We'd give them a kid pack. They'd pay one price to, and then there would be be padded a little bit so that we could give that back to the school. The kids loved that. I had kids that became my employees that said they loved going to the after school program, and then they would come back and they couldn't wait till they could get a job. And I would hire kids as early as 14. That was the legal age. They didn't close, and there was a lot of things they didn't do, but they could pop popcorn and serve it up for an hour. And so that was a program that we did that we really loved, and we did it for quite a while. And then I think until Mrs. Shearer retired, and then there was a new principal, and then it just kind of panned out. We couldn't get it coordinated. It was more difficult to get the permissions and the buses and just get it all coordinated. But that was a big program that we did. And then we did my booking agent, very important in the movie business. He's the one who connected me with everybody at the beginning. There was a Indiana booking agency, and there was only 2 bookers there. I had one that was dedicated, and they did most of the small movie houses in the state, the independents they booked for. And because they were basically the go-between between the theater and the big movie companies. So we had accounts with, Disney, Universal, all of the big, Sony, all of the big things, but they took care of all the business, and we had to report. We would report, our ticket. We'd have to report our tickets, box offices, because we paid for the movies based on a percentage of the box office that we would take in. So anyway, booking agent, Matt, he was very, very important. And he hooked me up with all of the guys who knew about the equipment that we needed, how to get the equipment updated, running, taught me everything I know. But anyway, he said that years before they had done this free Wednesday, and a lot of other of the small movie theaters would do this free Wednesday program. And so basically the booking agent would put together a whole schedule for the summer. And all the theaters would play. They'd book all the same films for all the places. and we got them, a little bit. We paid a flat fee for them because we were giving them away for free. We couldn't pay the percentage. And so I'd go around to the local businesses and get them to sponsor a movie or a couple of movies so that we could do that, and then we would make our money by selling concessions. And it was so popular that we would have to do 2, sometimes 3 showings a day to get all of the people in that would come. It was a lot of people and it was a lot of fun. So we put together a whole poster for the whole movie with the sponsor for the summer, with the sponsors and all the movies and the dates and everything like that. And kids used to just flock to those free things. And then like I said, we started doing some live music. We couldn't really do live music on the weekends, which was a little prohibitive for us, because we booked a movie for the weekend. They wanted us to play it. The studio expected us to play it every showing. They didn't want us taking Saturday night off out of their box office to do a concert. So we would try to do them on Thursday nights or Sunday nights or other nights. And so we brought in some really good, a lot of Indiana local talent. Jenny DeVoe was one of our favorites. We had some shows where our local author, Phil Gully, would come and talk and tell stories. He was also at our opening gala talking about his memories of the theater from when he was little. And he would do shows with other Indiana singer-songwriters with both storytelling and live music. And then when Chuck Watts was there, he brought in some more national touring singer-songwriters, which were really good. That was a lot of fun that we did. And then in the later years, we struck a relationship with the hospital, Hendricks Regional. They wanted to reward their employees, so they would have employee nights in which they would basically sponsor the movies and buy their employees their tickets and concessions for the night. So that was a really, really good boom for us to be able to, it helped us. The movie business is a little bit cyclical. They put out movies and you're really busy, and then there's several months where there's just not much and you don't get a lot of business. And so we'd use our summer months and our big programs to kind of stockpile enough to get us through the leaner months. So those types of programs were really beneficial because, as you might guess, there's not a lot of money. And I always tried to explain to people that we really did make our money and pay our bills with concessions. I was always really like, I don't care where you're going to the movies, don't take your own concessions in. Even if you think their concessions outrageous, most of the money that you pay in your ticket price, that's going to Hollywood. Like, that's paying booking agents, it's paying film delivery, it's paying Hollywood, it's paying, George Clooney and like all those people. That's where the money comes from, ticket sales. So we have to pay all of our bills. I have to pay my employees, my insurance, my utility bills, my concession, all of it has to be paid pretty much out of what we make out of concession money. We try to keep ours reasonable. We really, really wanted to cater to families. We weren't trying to make a lot of money. Not that we could have, even if we had tried, but we just wanted to keep Lee's vision was to have the theater open for the people in town, to have people be able to bring their families. His grandchildren could come, my children could come, my grandchildren. I had one granddaughter who ended up working for me before I left. That they could come and enjoy the movies, and that a family could go and they could buy concessions, and whatever was left over was what we were going to be happy with. That was kind of Lee's philosophy, and we tried to follow through with that as well. But it was kind of difficult sometimes to get those bills paid when not very many people were coming to the movies. So those big programs, I always felt, were really an investment in the theater, which was an investment in our community more so, and that whoever is owning the theater. And I imagine that it still plays out largely like that.
So you mentioned the community. You mentioned the community several times, both in how they've interacted with the theater as well as just what it meant to them personally. So, what would you say the theater means to this community?
I think it's a focal point. I think it's a gathering place. I think that there used to be a theater in most small towns, and that's where people would go. If you watch TV or you watch the movies, that's where they go and watch their Saturday afternoon cartoons and serials and all the things. And it's where you would see the people that your neighbors. And mostly they just aren't functional anymore. If they exist at all in a small town, there's not that many that are functioning as a movie house. It's very hard to compete with the multiplexes and the big companies. It's just really difficult. And you got to let people, know you got to make it affordable. You got to make it different. It was always my goal to make sure that my staff was very friendly, that you felt like you were going into someplace very familiar, and that you always were going to see people that you knew there. And it was true. We'd have some people that would drop their kids off and they'd meet up with their friends. Um, we we would have, families that would come together. We would do birthday parties. We did all sorts of parties as well. We did graduation parties, anniversary parties, you know, wedding announcements we would put up on our screen. We'd let people come in and film things. We just really felt like we were the place that people could come and whatever they could think we needed to do. We did fundraisers for different kinds of organizations, all sorts. We would do movie night fundraisers. We would do fashion show fundraisers, concert fundraisers, all sorts of things like that. So we felt like whatever we did, we really were giving back to the community. And that was really important to Lee Comer. And it was important to me that the theater, if it's not open and it's not functioning, then it is no longer an asset to your community. It's just a drain on your community. It's just an empty building that building is very expensive to maintain. It's very expensive to renovate. It's expensive to heat, all the things. It's hard. And if you don't have business in there, your building is just going to fall apart. It's just not going to be maintained. And then it's just going to be that sad place in your community that used to be something and now is an eyesore. So having a working theater in your town is a gathering place for people and families. It's a useful place to be able to serve people's needs, and it's not really good for much else. I mean, once it's not a movie theater, it's not really good for anything else. I mean, people do civic theater and there are other ways to use it, but if it's not being used as a theater in some capacity, it's to drain on the community. At least that's my opinion. So I was always happy that we were able to save it and maintain it and have it a thriving business. And it still is a thriving business in this town. People all the time, they love to go there. I see those same messages up on the marquee, happy birthday, or will you go to prom with me, or will you marry me, or whatever it is. That is just fun. People, photographs, senior photos, all sorts of things. So, yeah.
I absolutely love that answer. I think that hits at the heart of it. So I'm gonna shift a little bit. So as I understand it, the building itself was probably built somewhere around, at least that particular building, 1920-ish.
Yeah, 1926, I think, is what I mostly read. It had been kind of a smaller building and then it was expanded. My understanding is that at one time, maybe even where the gallery is was part of the auditorium, but I'm not sure about that.
Well, since it is so old, I've heard y'all occasionally find some pretty cool stuff from back when. Uh, can you tell me about some of the stuff y'all found?
Well, of course, the original seats were still there when we took it over, and we put them back in. And I found, so back in the hallway, there's a kind of a basement cellar area, and there were just the stairs and everything back there was just stacked with more and more and more seats. And I was like, where could these seats have even been? I don't even understand where they all were. And I guess back in the day, before things had been modified, they were closer together. They were all the way to the back. I mean, you'd walk from that lobby straight in there, and there were seats everywhere. So we found all those old seats. After we'd been open for a couple of years, we discovered that those old seats were kind of small. Apparently people back in the 20s were a little bit smaller than people in the 2000s. So people just complained. There was one row of seats that were like bigger, two rows where the seats were a little bit bigger, and you could see on the floor where it was just like the paint was wearing, like everybody knew they get there early, they get the big seats. So we took those out and we upgraded them again, not with brand new seating, but seats that came out of another theater somewhere, with cup holders, which we never had before, that worked. But I did keep a few of the seats and kind of took them back to their not original, but mostly original, and kind of kept them in the back for history's sake. But we found those. I found, some old projection equipment. There's an old carbon arc lamp house up there. Just old movie things. Uh, there was attic space that was filled with all sorts of things. But I did have, I can't remember exactly when, I got a visit from a lady whose dad had run the theater back, I think maybe in the 50s. And his name is going to escape me right now. But he had daughters also. It was interesting because I have 4 daughters and they all worked for me. And his daughters had worked for him at the theater back in the day. And he had passed away and they were cleaning out some things. And she brought me some things that I thought were kind of interesting. There was a couple of movie reels. She wanted me to play for them this movie reel, which they believe was a montage of Disney clips that he had spliced together and used to play for them. And they brought it and they thought that's what it was and they wanted to see it. So we put it on and we watched it, and it wasn't what they thought it was. I don't know that they ever found that special reel that their dad made them. But it was, I thought it was so interesting. It was an old newsreel, and it was, one of them was the newsreel from when John Kennedy was shot. And so was the actual, newsreel footage that they would have played at the movies before the movie at the time. And I thought that was really interesting. It's still at the theater. I mean, I left it there, of course, when I left. And then there was another one that it was something about the Gemini space mission, I think. And so I thought those were really interesting. They had brought those back. And then they also brought some books, like scrapbooks and things that he had, and some just like books of movie, history and things like that they brought, and some other little trinkets and things. There was, I think I found these, maybe they brought them, but I think we found these old tickets and I used them for different things. They were really old strips of movie, like to get into the movie theater, and they said Royal Theater. They were printed with Royal Theater, and they were like 10 cents or 15 cents to get in. And then there was like printing on the back. I thought those were really super cool, that we found. Yeah, old, splicers and just all sorts of little movie things.
That is really cool. So, I mean, the pandemic hit everyone, and I feel like I kind of have to ask, what was it like during that time?
Yeah, that was really hard because we were coming off of our best year ever. Like we just had done really good business and feeling really good about how things were going. And then I remember when everything started to go crazy, I thought this will be fine. We can last a few months. We'll be okay because we just had that great year. We're going to be okay. And so we started rethink. So we tried to stay open a little bit, and then we realized that wasn't not going to work. We weren't even allowed to be open at a certain point. And all of my employees, except for one, everybody was part-time, including myself. And most were teenagers. I had one adult that worked for me, but it was a part-time job for her too. So I didn't have any employees that were depending, including myself, that were depending on this business to make a living or feed their family, which was good. I figured all I had to do was pay my bills, pay my rent, pay, whatever utility bills we had. We weren't, booking films. So some of our, expenses like that were down. Although obviously it was a really difficult time for the booking agents as well, for a little while, because there were no movies coming out either. Nobody was making movies. Nobody was releasing movies. So we tried to change gears a little bit. We started selling concessions because everybody, was watching movies at home. And so we'd be open, we'd wear our masks, and we'd use all the safety, all plexiglass, all the things, and have spots on, everybody. We put marks on the floor. Everybody had to space out. And people were very supportive, especially at the beginning. They'd come in and they'd buy their bags of popcorn and their, to take home. And that helped us pay the bills for a little while. While we still could, we tried to book some like old movies that we'd, do a night, and we'd only let in a certain amount of people, and we would space them out. And then we were mandated really to be closed. So we couldn't do that anymore. So, we just we just did the best we could. And then later in the year, when it went on and on and on, I had to ask for a little help from the landlord. I can't pay the full lease because I'm not making any money. I'm not open. We still would do a private birthday party occasionally, that sort of thing. And then I really started to worry about the future of the film industry itself, just because people were, number one, getting used to streaming everything at home now. They were used to, staying at home in their home theater and not having to pay the prices and go out. And, I was afraid. And then they also started changing the way they release movies. They release, sometimes they'll be doing a lot of simultaneous releases now. It'll be at the theater, but you can also pay and get it at home. And I just felt like this really, really was going to affect the future of the business. And I'm not in it anymore, so I can't say for sure. I think it has bounced back more than I feared that it would, but, not to what it might have been what it was before, just because the change. Hollywood was already changing things before that. They already wanted their money quicker. They were already doing, they expected most of their money in those first couple of weeks. That's what they wanted. They weren't, the films just weren't coming out as quality, in my opinion, and everything was already changing and becoming more difficult. Made it a lot easier when the digital age came, and made it a lot easier for people to watch movies at home. And a lot faster. They don't expect, used to be you'd have 2-3 months in the theater to watch a movie, and that was the only way you could watch it. And then it became like, well, 3 weeks, a month later, you can watch it at home. Well, why am I going to go pay all those prices? So it became really difficult. And I decided that I had a lot of other things going on in my life, and it had always been a difficult decision. What should I let go of? And the Royal was my passion, and I didn't want to let go of it, but it became obvious that this was just going to become more of a struggle and less of a joy. And so I just decided to pass it on at that point.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It sounded like the community was very supportive during that time.
They were. They came and they would share out on Facebook, go get your concessions, and they would do that. And they even, made some donations that we used to keep the doors open. We kept our doors open as long as we could, as long as we were allowed. We were trying to do something. And, as long as we could. And they were, as they always had been, they realized that the theater was there, not for me, not for Lee Comer, but for them, and they wanted to support it, and they did.
I absolutely love that. So now I have a bit of more of a fun question. Do you know of any like folk tales or urban legends concerning the royal?
Um, well, I don't know about folktale. Well, it had, when I got it, it had an age-old nickname, the Royal Rat Hole. I can only imagine where that came around. People would talk about that, dungeon-like basement where the boys would have to go to the bathroom, and maybe there were rats down there, probably were. Maybe there were rats in the auditorium, because I'll tell you, it's really hard to keep all the candy up off of that floor. There's a lot of little nicks and crannies. And people would tell me a story about a man who used to work there many years ago by the name of Bambi Jim. And I don't know if he had some special needs, maybe. But he was a man, and he was the usher, and he was charged, I think, with keeping in control. But I had young men or men tell me that they remember being boys, and they remember he would come through with his flashlight, and if they had their feet on the seats, he would crack them in the knee with their flashlight. So I don't know if that's true or not, but everybody talked about, all the old timers, they talked about Bambi Jim. So there were stories of hauntings. We did entertain some ghost hunters occasionally. They would want to come in and maybe have a late night screening, and then spend the night with their equipment hunting for ghosts. And they claimed that they had activity. And there was a book that was written at the time of haunted places in Indiana, and I think we got a chapter in that. And I was in the theater many countless times by myself at night, late at night, in the middle of the night, splicing film, doing whatever, up in the projection room, which can seem a little bit creepy when you're there at night. I never had any kind of supernatural experiences, but a couple of my teenage employees and kids said that they felt like they'd be up there and they would hear something, or a door would slam or whatever. They felt like there was maybe some kind of a spirit. I never personally saw it, but maybe there was. And I was also told that I think maybe it was the original owner, maybe the man who built it, and I can't recall his name, or maybe somebody else from the early days had his funeral in the building. I've read that and I've heard that, but I don't know if he really haunts it.
No, that's great. That was all my questions. I do think we've hit just about time. I want to thank you. This was really a great experience. I
Thank you.
enjoyed interviewing you. Do you have anything else you would like to say, or?
There's so many more things I could say about the Royal Theater, but um, I'm just really grateful that I had the 20 years that I was there. It's been a big, portion of my life in Danville, and I just have loved it. So thanks.
And I'm judging by how prevalent the community is, I'm sure, or came up in the stories, I'm sure we all appreciate it. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for your time.